So you released LeBron's letter via SI on the return to Cleveland. You have a recent article about LeBron James. It's very unique in America. And this happens from time to time. Ahmad Rashad had a great relationship with Michael Jordan. I remember that. You have a better than average relationship with LeBron James. Let's go to the letter. And when it was released, he could have chosen anybody. How did that work?
Well, I'd started talking to him shortly after he got to Miami. And when you're at Sports Illustrated, you do these larger feature pieces where you're sitting down with somebody 45 minutes, an hour and a half. Sometimes you build rapport with the subject. Sometimes you don't. With him, I suppose I was able to in some way. And then when that came up in 2014, I went to him and his people and said, this is something that people do sometimes for Sports Illustrated, is they do more of these first-person pieces. At that time, it was probably fairly unusual. Now it's kind of become standard, and it's something that he wanted to do, and that was the result.
So you knew before virtually everybody on the planet he was going to Cleveland. How many days before did you know?
Just a day, not even a full day.
How do you keep that secret?
Yeah, it's hard because you go down to the sports book and you see like a betting line. No, it goes against every instinct as a journalist because you want to shout it out, you want to tweet it out, and you can't. But honestly, my instinct with the whole thing, with the essay, was to explain why he was going to do what he was going to do. I didn't really imagine that it would get out that way first. I thought the news would get broken probably by somebody else, but I wanted to explain sort of what was in his heart, what was in his head for the reasons he was going back to Cleveland. So he sat down
with you for an hour and said, okay, I'll do the letter. Here's how I want it to go.
No, it was just an interview like any other interview, honestly. Any other interview we've done. I interviewed him for 45 minutes. I asked him a bunch of different questions, and the only difference was I went back to my hotel room and wrote it in his voice instead of my own voice, emailed it to him. He makes some edits. It's interesting to be edited by LeBron James. You kind of get back in there, you work on it, and then you let it run.
And then recently, you had a sit down with him, and he talks about comparisons to Michael Jordan.
Right.
Now, that is obviously something that I would do. That's a great narrative for me. It's a lot of fun. You don't hear Barack Obama comparing himself to JFK.
Right.
You don't hear usually people who are industry leaders, Gates, comparing himself to others. Were you surprised? How surprised were you that LeBron was willing to go there?
So it wasn't me. I was at a camp, and I was sitting among 80 basketball players, 80 high school and college players, basically LeBron looking in a mirror. Okay, these are all the kids who he used to be. I mean, he would have been the best one, clearly. We're talking about the best 60 to 80 high school players, amateur players in the country. And one of them asks at the end of a film session in which LeBron is deconstructing Game 7 in a really animated way, he asks, what motivates you? And in that setting,
a little kid did?
It wasn't a little kid. It was a high school player. We're talking about probably a McDonald's All-American or something. Asked him this. And he's comfortable in that setting. More comfortable than I'm sure he would be with me. Definitely more comfortable than he would be in front of a camera. And he gave an honest answer. I mean, he said, I'm chasing a ghost. The ghost I'm chasing played in Chicago. So it wasn't, I don't feel like it was scripted. I don't feel like it was calculated. In a moment where he was very comfortable and very candid, he said something that was honest. Now, look, he was probably, I'm sure, emboldened, to be honest, by winning the third championship, by the way they won it. Could he have voiced that with one title, with two? Maybe not. But I do think this is the one subplot among all these subplots that have followed him. I think it's the one that really has driven him and has really driven this whole generation. I mean, when you talk about the picture on the bedroom wall, his screensaver used to be him playing one-on-one with Michael Jordan, a Photoshop picture. I think this is the image that has driven him.
Why do you think Jordan was reluctant to be involved with social activism? How possible is it that LeBron senses being compared, and feels one way he can elevate above Michael is to be more socially aware? Is that a plausible theory?
For this generation of players, it seems like they've copied just about everything about Jordan. They want to pattern themselves after just about everything except that. That seems to be the one piece where it's cool to be socially conscious. It's cool to be engaged in the issues and have an opinion. And I think that influence is as much maybe going against the Jordan legacy as it is kind of getting swept up in Carmelo and Dwayne Wade and Chris Paul, and that group of stars has decided that they want to be educated on these issues and they want to talk about these issues. I think it's something that they discuss when they're together. For instance, this ESPY speech. LeBron had talked to his father-in-law, 71 years old, from Georgia, about race relations. Wade texted the group, should we do something in response to all of these incidents? Melo has his Instagram post. They all get together post-vacation, and those were the seeds for that ESPY's address. I think LeBron likes to wade into these social issues. I don't know how much it's about, rejecting Jordan, how much of it's about embracing Muhammad Ali, but I definitely think that this is a part of being a star today. It seems like they want to embrace the whole thing. They want to be spokespeople for the league. They want to be there for the Players Association, and I think they want to speak out on issues too.
Lee Jenkins, Sports Illustrated senior writer. I've always sort of believed that, not that LeBron went back to Cleveland reluctantly, but Dan Gilbert had some making up to do.
Yeah.
You had, and I don't know because I know Maverick Carter. I know three of the guys pretty well around him, and I have friendly relationships with all of them. But when you're hosting a radio show, I don't get to go to the games like everybody else, and you've carved out some real nice relationships here. When we go back to him returning to Cleveland, do you think he made the decision up? Like, when did he make it up, in your opinion? I mean, you had a rare glimpse into his emotional state because Dan Gilbert reportedly came down and apologized.
Yeah, they had a meeting in Miami, and I asked him about that day in the hotel, about Gilbert going down there and them talking it out, and certainly that meeting had to have happened. But honestly, Colin, I started keeping track of these quotes from him in 2011, little kind of breadcrumbs he dropped, I felt like, leading the way back to Cleveland.
Really?
I remember going down interviewing Tristan Thompson, Kyrie Irving, the year after he'd left. Cavaliers were bad. Irving was great. And Thompson said, I hear from LeBron. He'll call. He checks in. He would say things like, I love the announcers. I kind of miss the announcers in Cleveland. And I wonder when he won this first championship in Miami, he said, I wonder what a parade would look like down East 4th. I think that he was, he has a sense, I think, of completing circles and of his own story. And I think he believed that going back to Cleveland would complete a real circle in his career. I'm not going to say he regretted the move. I don't think he regretted it. He won 2 titles. He learned a lot there. But I think when the opportunity came up to implement what he learned, to bring it back to where he'd begun, I think he couldn't resist the weight of that. And listen, I think that the image he had in mind, I remember talking to him about it that day at the Wynn Hotel, the image he had in mind of the parade in Cleveland and of winning that championship in Cleveland, I talked to him after they won Game 7. And he said, this was the vision. This was what it looked like. This is what I have thought about basically every night since then, was how to get to this point, how to close this circle.
Has the relationship changed as he has grown in power and influence with his 4 friends?
I don't think so. I mean, they're really close. And, he is very close with Rich Paul, obviously, his agent, and they've recruited other players, and that agency is no longer just LeBron James now. I mean, you have Ben Simmons, the number 1 pick, is part of Rich Paul's, part of Clutch Sports now too, and John Wall is part of that agency. So, they've done things in the business world, and it's honestly not usually what I ask him about. Whenever I ask him about that, he quotes Pat Riley. He says, Pat Riley says, the main thing is the main thing. And the main thing for him, when he's talking publicly at least, and I think the main thing for him in his whole life is basketball, and he sort of leaves them to handle more of the business side of the operation. But clearly, that business side is meaningful to him too. I don't know if there are very many athletes.
Friend? Who's his best friend, Lee?
I mean, I would say Maverick. I would assume Maverick, but Randy Mims is with him every day, and Rich Paul's obviously his agent. And that group, I mean, if you look at the finals after they won Game 7, I was right down there on the floor. That group came together, and that hug was, I mean, it was full of emotion. I mean, that hug wasn't just about 2003 and the draft in Cleveland. That hug was going back to St. Vincent, St. Mary.
Where do you see his ego? Like when you sit down with him, everybody's got an ego.
Right.
Like do you ever see, because he's pretty controlled. Like, I've always found it fascinating. He really, I mean, he's been kicked in south of the border. He's been punched. He's been targeted. you rarely see him lose control. And this is a guy I've seen Kobe throw punches, MJ hit teammates. There's got to be a moment. Where is the release? Where is it?
I mean, it's probably on the rim. You know, I mean, that's probably how he handles it. It's probably when he kind of takes that half step back and drives to the rim. I guess that's the release, because you're right. I shouldn't say I think he feels, but I don't think he plays by the same rules as everybody else. If he did that, if he responded in the way you're talking about, I think the outcry would be so great. I think he realizes that. He realizes his place. I think when he says something, even when he drops this Jordan line, I think he knows kind of the way that's all going to be interpreted. I think he's found a way to insulate himself from all of that. I think when he got to Miami, all of that criticism, all of that scrutiny, I think hurt him in some way and probably hurt his game in some way.
Now, he said that.
And he went and he said he was going to go back to kind of the Cleveland way and more joyful and smile on your face and dancing on the sideline. But honestly, I never really saw him do that. I think what happened, if I'm being candid about it, is I think he became comfortable in it. I think he became comfortable in that hothouse that always surrounds him, this kind of Truman Show environment that he grew up in. And I think he started to sort of thrive in it. And even now in Cleveland, you see other players, it's taken a while. It took a year. I don't think they were comfortable with all of that scrutiny, all of that stuff that follows LeBron James. And at some point this year, I think they got comfortable. And I think that's what happened in Miami too. Year two, they're sort of like, hey, let's wear the black hat. We ride with the biggest, baddest dude in the world. Let's go do it.
Was the Kevin Love thing as bad as people speculated?
It's just the way he fit in.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't great. I mean, there were times.
No, I think a lot of it there wasn't great. I think a lot of what happened with him in Cleveland and, you know, I mean, he would worry about guys being late and I'm not talking about Love specifically, but just players being late and players skipping voluntary shooting sessions and even little things like dirty clothes on the locker room floor.
Oh, really?
Not that the ship wasn't run tightly enough and that it needed to be more like Miami. And I think that was a lot of what he was seeing. I think Miami was a formative experience for him, and he thought he could take a little bit of that sort of ironclad environment that Riley and Spoelstra had ingrained, rock solid. I think he wanted to take that back to Cleveland. I think it was harder than he thought. I mean, let's be honest, with culture changers in sports, it's usually an executive, right? Or it's usually a coach. It's not typically a player. And that's kind of what he signed on for. And if you look back at his life, he wasn't naturally a leader. I mean, he was a quiet teenager. He was fairly withdrawn when he came into the league. This has been an evolution. The power of his voice, I think, is something that he's had to really develop over time. Even more so, the game came naturally. But I think sort of that leadership, sort of that ability to change culture, to me, that's in many ways the greatest success of this championship.
The great Lee Jenkins, Sports Illustrated senior writer.